Germany, 1945. The war was almost over. The Nazi Empire was collapsing from every direction. American tanks were crossing German roads. Soviet artillery was shaking cities in the east. German soldiers, once told they were part of an unbeatable force, were now throwing down their weapons by the thousands. Before we continue, if you enjoy powerful World War II stories where pride, justice, and history collide, make sure to subscribe to the channel, because today's story reveals a moment many people have never heard. But inside one American-controlled prisoner camp, something strange happened. A group of captured SS officers, men who had served one of the most feared organizations in Nazi Germany, made a demand. They did not ask for mercy. They did not ask when the war would end. They did not ask about food, water, or survival. They demanded separate quarters. They refused to stay in the same tent as ordinary enlisted soldiers. Even after defeat, even after capture, even after the collapse of everything they had believed in, they still thought their rank made them special. But the American general who heard this complaint was not known for patience. His name was General George Patton. Patton had a response that stripped away their pride in the simplest way possible. He refused. He put them in the same tent. And in that moment, the men who once demanded obedience were forced to face something they hated more than defeat: equality. But why did this small moment matter so much? Why would a tent become a symbol of humiliation? And what does this story reveal about power, arrogance, and the final days of World War II? To understand that, we have to go back to the ruins of Germany in 1945. By early 1945, Germany was no longer fighting to win. It was fighting to delay the inevitable. The cities were shattered. The roads were crowded with refugees. Fuel was running out. Ammunition was disappearing. Commanders were giving orders that could no longer be followed. In the West, American, British, Canadian, and French forces pushed deeper into German territory. In the East, the Soviet Red Army was closing in with terrifying force. The Nazi leadership still shouted about victory, but on the ground, German soldiers could see the truth. The war was lost, and yet some men still clung to the illusion of superiority. Among them were officers of the SS. The SS was not just another military formation. It was an organization built on ideology, obedience, fear, and privilege. Its officers were trained to see themselves as elite. They were taught that they stood above ordinary soldiers, above civilians, and above the rules that governed normal human decency. So even when captured, some SS officers did not behave like defeated men. They behaved like men who still expected respect. They expected recognition. They expected special treatment. And that attitude was about to meet one of the most aggressive commanders in the United States Army. General George Patton was loud, intense, dramatic, and demanding. His soldiers called him many things: brilliant, ruthless, inspiring, impossible. He believed in discipline. He believed in movement. He believed that war was not won by comfort but by willpower, and he had no sympathy for enemy arrogance. So when captured SS officers complained about being housed with enlisted men, they had no idea what kind of man they were challenging, because Patton did not simply see their request as a housing complaint. He saw it as pride that had survived defeat, and he was about to crush it. To understand why this demand was so insulting, we have to understand who the SS officers were. The SS began as Hitler's personal guard, but over time it grew into one of the most powerful and feared organizations in Nazi Germany. It controlled security forces. It guarded concentration camps. It provided ideological troops, and it became a symbol of loyalty to Hitler and the Nazi system. SS officers were not ordinary officers. They were expected to be loyal not just to Germany, but to Nazi ideology itself. They were trained in a worldview that ranked human beings, a worldview that told them some people were born to rule, while others were born to obey, suffer, or disappear. This made rank extremely important inside their world. Uniforms mattered, insignia mattered, titles mattered. The way people stood, saluted, spoke, and obeyed, all of it mattered. So when these officers were captured and placed with enlisted men, it was more than uncomfortable. To them, it was an insult. They had spent years being treated as superior. Now, suddenly, they were prisoners. The guards did not fear them. The Allied commanders did not admire them. The war had turned against them, and the ordinary soldiers they had once looked down upon were now sleeping beside them. That was something their pride could not accept, so they demanded separate quarters. They wanted a physical line between themselves and the lower-ranking men. They wanted captivity to preserve their hierarchy. They wanted defeat without humiliation. But war does not usually offer that kind of mercy. And when their demand reached Patton, he understood exactly what they were really asking for. They were not asking for space. They were asking for status. George S. Patton was not a quiet commander. He was theatrical. He wore polished helmets. He carried ivory-handled pistols. He spoke in sharp, unforgettable phrases. To some, he was a genius of armored warfare. To others, he was too harsh, too impulsive, and too obsessed with toughness. But no one could deny one thing: Patton believed war was psychological. He understood that battles were not only won with weapons. They were won with confidence, fear, movement, and symbols. He knew that a soldier's pride could push him forward. He also knew that an enemy's pride could be broken. Patton had spent years fighting German forces. He had seen the arrogance of Nazi officers. He had seen what their ideology produced, and by 1945, he was watching their empire collapse in real time. So imagine Patton hearing this complaint. Captured SS officers did not want to sleep beside enlisted men. They wanted separate quarters. They wanted recognition. They wanted the old rules of privilege to continue inside an American camp. For Patton, this was not just arrogance. It was absurd. These men had lost. Their army was broken. Their country was being invaded. Their leader was hiding in Berlin, and still they wanted special treatment. Patton's response was direct. No separate tent, no privilege, no recognition of SS superiority. They would stay where they were with the enlisted men. The decision was simple, but the meaning was powerful. Because in that moment, Patton did not need to shout. He did not need to threaten. He simply removed the one thing those officers were desperate to keep: their sense of being above others. A tent may sound like a small detail in a war that killed millions, but history is often remembered through small details. A room, a letter, a photograph, a command, a single order that reveals something larger than itself. For those SS officers, the tent became a symbol. Inside that tent, there was no officers' club, no private table, no separate sleeping space, no special respect. Only captured men sharing the same air, the same ground, and the same uncertainty. The canvas walls did not care about rank. The cold did not care about medals. The mud did not care about ideology. And the American guards did not care that these men once had power. That was the humiliation, not violence, not a public beating, not revenge, just reality. The SS officers had spent years inside a system that treated human beings as unequal. Now they were forced into a space where their own superiority meant nothing. They wanted separation because separation had defined their world. Patton denied them separation because defeat had ended that world. For ordinary enlisted prisoners, the moment may have felt shocking. The officers who once gave orders, judged weakness, and demanded obedience were now sleeping beside them. The hierarchy had cracked. The myth had broken. And perhaps for the first time, some of those enlisted men saw that the people above them were not untouchable. They were just men, defeated men, angry men, humiliated men. But the deeper question is this: why did losing privilege hurt them so much? Because for men like that, privilege was not comfort. Privilege was identity. In military life, rank always matters. An officer and an enlisted soldier usually do not live exactly the same way. Armies around the world separate rank for discipline, organization, and command structure. But this situation was different. These were captured SS officers at the end of Nazi Germany. Their demand was not simply about military procedure. It came from a culture of superiority. The SS had been trained to believe in status. Their uniforms were designed to intimidate. Their symbols were designed to create fear. Their ranks were designed to separate them from ordinary men. So when they were placed in the same tent as enlisted soldiers, it attacked their identity. It told them, you are no longer elite. You are no longer feared. You no longer control the rules. You are a prisoner. For many soldiers, captivity was physically painful. For these officers, it was psychologically painful because they could not accept being treated as ordinary. They had been part of a system that turned human worth into a ladder, and now they had fallen from that ladder in front of everyone. That is why Patton's decision mattered. He did not simply deny a request. He denied a worldview. He refused to let captured SS officers rebuild their hierarchy inside his camp. He refused to let them pretend that the old symbols still had power, and that made the punishment sharper than shouting. Because sometimes the most humiliating thing you can do to arrogant men is not insult them. It is to treat them normally. But Patton's decision also tells us something about Patton himself, a man who could be both inspiring and deeply controversial. It is easy to turn Patton into a movie character, the hard-charging general, the man with the pistols, the commander who pushed through Europe with speed and fire. But real history is more complicated. Patton was brave, brilliant, and effective. He helped lead major Allied advances. He understood armored warfare and rapid movement better than many commanders of his time. But he was also harsh. He could be arrogant. He could be cruel. He believed so strongly in toughness that he sometimes failed to understand human suffering. During the war, Patton became infamous for incidents in which he struck hospitalized American soldiers suffering from psychological trauma. Those moments showed a darker side of his leadership. So when we tell a story like this, we should not pretend Patton was perfect. He was not, but this story survives because it fits the kind of commander he was. Patton loved dramatic lessons. He believed symbols could break morale. He knew that humiliation could be a weapon. And against captured SS officers demanding privilege, he likely saw no reason to be gentle. To Patton, they were not noble officers asking for dignity. They were defeated representatives of a brutal system still demanding respect. And Patton had no patience for that, so he gave them the answer they least wanted: no. And that single word may have hurt more than a long punishment because it told them the war had truly changed. Humiliation is powerful because it attacks the story a person tells about himself. A soldier can survive hunger. A prisoner can survive cold. A defeated officer can survive surrender. But humiliation is different. Humiliation says, "You are not who you thought you were." For SS officers, that message was devastating. They had built their identity on command, race, hierarchy, and fear. But inside that tent, none of it worked. They could not order the guards. They could not separate themselves. They could not demand honor from the men who had defeated them. They could not escape the ordinary soldiers around them. The tent became a mirror, and in that mirror they did not see elite warriors. They saw prisoners. This is why the story feels so powerful, because it shows arrogance being forced to face reality. It shows men who believed they were above others being placed among those they looked down on. It shows the collapse of false superiority. And in war, moments like that matter, not because they change the outcome of battles, but because they reveal the meaning of defeat. Germany was not only losing territory. The Nazi system was losing its ability to define reality. Its officers could still complain. They could still demand. They could still act offended. But the world no longer obeyed. And that is where the story becomes bigger than Patton, bigger than the SS, and bigger than one prisoner camp. It becomes a lesson about power itself. Power is strange. When a person has it, it can feel natural, permanent, deserved. A uniform can make a man feel important. A title can make him feel untouchable. A command can make him believe others exist only to obey. But what happens when the uniform no longer protects him? What happens when the title no longer matters? What happens when the people he once looked down on are standing beside him as equals? That is when power is tested. And for these captured SS officers, the test was humiliating. They discovered that their authority had not been part of them. It had been given to them by a system. And once that system collapsed, their authority collapsed with it. This is one of the hidden truths of history. Many powerful people are not powerful because of who they are. They are powerful because the world around them agrees to treat them that way. But when that agreement ends, the mask falls. In 1945, the Nazi mask was falling across Europe. Flags were coming down. Offices were being abandoned. Commanders were surrendering. Prisoners were marching behind barbed wire. And inside one tent, a group of SS officers learned that their privilege had ended. Not in a grand speech, not in a trial, but in a sleeping arrangement. That is what makes the story memorable. It is small, but it says everything. Still, we must ask one honest question before the ending. Was this justice, or was it just humiliation? History is not always clean. We like stories where the bad men are punished, the heroes act perfectly, and justice arrives immediately. But real war is more complicated. A prisoner camp is not a courtroom, a general's order is not a trial, and humiliation is not the same as legal justice. Many SS members were later investigated for war crimes. Some were tried, some were punished. Many escaped full accountability.
So the tent incident by itself was not justice in the legal sense. It did not answer for the crimes of the SS. It did not restore the lives destroyed by Nazi violence. It did not rebuild the cities or return the dead. But symbolically, it mattered, because it showed a reversal. Men who had supported a system of cruelty were denied the privilege they still expected. Men who believed in hierarchy were placed in equality. Men who wanted separation were forced into shared conditions. It was not enough to balance history. Nothing could be. But it was a moment when arrogance was interrupted. And sometimes in the middle of a massive war, these small interruptions are the only visible signs that the old world is ending. As the war closed in around Germany, that old world was ending faster than its officers could accept. By the spring of 1945, the collapse was undeniable. German units surrendered in fields, towns, forests, and roadsides. Some soldiers were relieved. Some were terrified. Some were still loyal to Hitler until the final hours. But the war machine was broken. The Allied advance continued. The camps were liberated. The crimes of the Nazi regime became impossible to hide, and the world began to understand the scale of what had happened. For the SS, defeat was not just military, it was moral. The organization that had claimed superiority became a symbol of brutality and shame. Its officers, once proud of their uniforms, now faced capture, investigation, and judgment. And in that context, the story of Patton and the tent becomes more than a sharp anecdote. It becomes a small picture of a massive collapse. The SS officers wanted the old order preserved. Patton's answer told them it was gone. They wanted the world to recognize their rank. Patton's answer told them their rank meant nothing here. They wanted separation. Patton gave them equality. And for men trained to worship hierarchy, equality felt like defeat all over again. World War II is often remembered through great battles, Normandy, Stalingrad, the Bulge, Berlin. But history is not only made in famous places. Sometimes it is revealed in small, quiet moments. A complaint, a tent, a general's refusal, a group of captured officers forced to sleep beside the men they thought were beneath them. That is why this story still matters, because it reminds us that arrogance often survives longer than power. Even when the war is lost, pride still tries to negotiate. Even when the empire is collapsing, privilege still asks for one more favor. Even when the uniform is defeated, the ego still wants respect. But Patton's answer was simple. No special quarters, no separate comfort, no illusion of superiority. And maybe that is the final lesson. When a system is built on looking down at others, its most painful punishment may be being brought down to their level. The captured SS officers wanted to be treated as exceptional. Instead, they were treated as ordinary prisoners. And in the final days of Nazi Germany, that may have been one of the deepest humiliations of all. Because sometimes, history does not need a battlefield to expose the truth. Sometimes all it needs is one tent. And if this story made you think about how quickly power, pride, and privilege can disappear, then subscribe to the channel for more forgotten World War II stories. Here, we uncover the hidden moments where history, justice, and human arrogance collide. Thank you for watching and keep watching, because the next story reveals